Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the PAX West demo version of Overload. This is something that I actually covered previously on the channel just by having a gameplay video of it, and it was specifically of the playable teaser that's available on Steam. I will have a link in the video description box to where you can take a look at that if you're interested. But this particular build is different from what you're seeing in the playable teaser that's on Steam. Special thanks to Revival Productions for getting in contact with me after the gameplay video I did of the previous build, because they actually ended up sending me a copy of the PAX demo, and I'm very appreciative of that because while I haven't actually covered them on the channel yet, I would consider myself a fan of the Descent games, at least Descent 1 and 2. I actually haven't played 3 yet, which is why I haven't done any of the videos on it yet. And you guys know me, I usually prefer to do things in sequence, so I was going to plan on doing Descent 1, 2, 3, and then Free Space and Free Space 2, which I'm sure some of you are at least looking forward to those Free Space 1 and 2 reviews. But then we have something like Overload, which is basically taking that gameplay style that the original Descent games had and converting it into a more modern engine with nice particle effects and things like that. If you haven't played any of the Descent games before, let me give you a quick rundown of what they are. They're called a 6 degree of freedom shooter, which basically means that you can move in full 3D as opposed to just running around on the ground and shooting stuff by aiming it with the mouse and then clicking the left mouse button. In this, it's actually requiring you to move in 3 dimensions to dodge projectiles, to maneuver around the environment, and to generally feel like you have a large degree of movement available to you that makes you feel like you're in basically a weightless environment. And very few games have even attempted something like that outside of the Descent series, so it is nice to see newer games coming along and trying that style of gameplay again, especially considering that it's much easier to reach a niche market these days with Steam and the like. But something like Overload is a bit different from simply being a game in this genre, because it has several of the members of the original development teams of the old school Descent games working to bring it to life. I mean, you got Mike Kulas and Matt Toshlag, who were the co-founders of Parallax, working on this thing, so obviously spearheading the project with straight up the creators of Descent, along with several people who worked on Descent 3, and of course Dan Wentz, who did the music for Descent 2 and Free Space 1 and 2, which is pretty awesome. Because particularly when you got to Descent 2, the soundtrack was something pretty distinctive, and you actually get a fair bit of that vibe when you play the demo versions of Overload, so that's definitely very well appreciated. But it really does show that it's a veteran team working on this, because they have absolutely nailed the feeling of a 6 degree of freedom shooter, even in this extremely early state that we have it in right now. As it stands, the PAX West demo version has the training mission as well as 2 challenge levels, which are just arenas where you go in and you try to get as high a score as possible by destroying as many enemy robots as possible before you eventually die. It's really something that's more to prove the concept and to give you a feel for how the game actually plays in terms of its raw mechanics than anything else. I'm not really going to talk too much about presentation here because nothing is final, but one thing they did do really well on was the particle effects. I mean, when you see these robots getting blasted to bits, it looks pretty fantastic. It's got some very nice bright colors going on with that. And let's face it, it's always incredibly satisfying when you get that last hit in and you start watching this thing breaking apart as it goes careening off into the side of the level and just bursts into a shower of particles and metal bits. But as it stands, again, it's still rather early in development, so I don't really expect the visuals to be all that stellar right now, but at least they've done a rather good job on that particular front. Likewise with the sound design. The sound effects are not particularly great right now, but they are subject to change, and the music is definitely very fitting for Descent, but there's only basically 2 or 3 tracks in this thing right now, so it's not really a full picture of how this thing's going to sound, but they're definitely on the right track there. But the one thing that does give me confidence in this project more than anything else is that the gameplay is butter smooth. The movement is exactly what you would want from a 6 degree of freedom shooter. It's slightly floaty, but it's intentionally so, because you're supposed to have this ability to maneuver very effectively in a 3D environment, and you're working with controls that are all pretty much spot on. The movement is just fast enough to where it feels like you actually have some momentum behind you, but at the same time, it's not so much that you can't react to anything. In fact, even when I was using what would generally be considered a slower input device, which is a joystick, it was still smooth and responsive, and I never really ran into all that many problems with it, other than simply the fact that I'm just wildly out of practice with this genre. The only real problems I had with this thing are related to the fact that, well, it's a demo version, so there's really not all that much to it other than just shoot a bunch of robots and get a general feel for how it works, and also the fact that a lot of the weapons are fairly low impact. Sure, the effects look pretty nice, but the weapons themselves don't exactly do the most damage out there. Now, this is something that the original Descent and Descent 2 had as well, but it'd be nice if the weapons did more damage, or at the very least had more visual feedback on the amount of damage they do, because while they do have a decent amount of visual feedback for when you hit something, it's just not enough to make the weapons feel particularly powerful. So that's something they could definitely work on, and they could also definitely work on the enemy variety, because as it stands, there's basically only 2 or 3 different types of enemies that you're going to face, and they all feel relatively similar. The only real difference among them is the one robot that comes after you with a saw blade, because it's the only melee one right now. But I'm not really going to criticize it too much for an early demo version only having a limited number of robots available. However, it is something that I do expect them to sort out by the time the full version of the game comes out, and especially if they put out a later beta version or something like that. Because right now the demo version does a very good job of proving the concept works and proving that it works pretty well, but it doesn't really do much more than that. It's not really enough to get you really interested in the actual game unless you are a big fan of the Descent games already and just know how they play. And ultimately that's the big takeaway from this. This is a game by the Descent devs for Descent fans, really. And it pretty much nails that feeling, even though all we've been able to play is some very early demo versions of this, where absolutely nothing is final and almost everything could change by the time the game comes out. But it looks and feels like a Descent game, a proper Descent game, and really that's all I need. Because the Descent games are definitely unique, and they definitely deserve a place in the modern revival of old school games. So at the very least, they've definitely managed to put this from the list of, well, maybe I'll take a look at it too. I'm definitely reviewing this when it comes out. Because even if survival mode in just about anything isn't really my thing, the core gameplay mechanics, that movement system, the way the weapons feel and look and everything like that, that all is very much Descent, and I'm so glad to see it back. Now, if only Parallax and Interplay can sort out their differences and manage to get Descent 1 through 3 back on sale on GOG again, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. Again, links in the video description box to where you can check out the playable teaser if you're interested. Just know that it's not exactly the same as the PAX demo that you're seeing in this footage. Namely, there's not as much content in the playable teaser, and the controls themselves are slightly less polished. But it still will definitely give you a good indication of where the game is going, at least at that time that build was released, which was several months ago. And it's gotten better since then when they did the PAX demo. So they're definitely on the right track here. Thanks for watching.